Get Rich Education is brought to you by Norada Real Estate and Corporate Direct.
Welcome to Get Rich Education with Keith Weinhold, giving you information and ideas on the investment that has turned more ordinary people into millionaires and billionaires than anything else, and can provide you with more wealth and happiness than you ever thought possible. Now, here's your host, investor, entrepreneur, business owner, and educator, Keith Weinhold.
Hey, welcome to GRE. This is Get Rich Education, episode 79. I'm your host, Keith Weinhold. I hope you've lived an abundant week as usual. We're talking about how to create passive income with a great guest today. This is passive income that's going to lead to your financial freedom. Passive income so that you don't have to work, or so that at least you can do the work that you choose to do rather than the work that you have to do. And we're doing it with a great guest that I guess I would call one of the great wealth strategists in all of real estate investing. That's the word I'd use, strategist, because he's really one of the most broad-based real estate investing brains that I know of. You first learned about our guest from episode 51 when he told us how you can basically be the bank rather than the borrower and earn a steady return secured with real estate in mortgage note investing. I'll give you more on that later. Let's meet our guest. Today's guest was once a high school band director, since transformed into a professional investor, developer, and syndicator whom has served as a principal or key advisor to over $800 million worth of real estate transactions. And he's done that in everything from apartments to office to retail to hospitality. He's also a top contact for private investors like you that want a steady return with mortgage note investing. And he's been a regular contributor here at GRE. Here he is, the founder of Hassle-Free Cashflow Investing. Welcome back to Get Rich Education, my friend, David Campbell.
Keith, I'm so excited to be here with you and your really smart listeners. And I just admire all of the gifts that you're giving to the real estate investor community.
Well, thanks, David. And you've had a pretty significant life change since the first two times you were on the show. This is your third time. You moved from California to Oregon. Tell us about that.
Well, Keith, it's been a dream of mine for a long time to get out of the rat race and get out of the city and get into a country life where I can really understand where my food comes from and to enjoy four seasons and the sea stars. And I've got young children and wanting to raise them in a country life. And so the ability to own real estate and to own mortgage paper has paved that financial path for us to live here on a ranch in Central Oregon, and allows me to work, wherever I want to work, and freedom of time and freedom of place. And I'm really grateful to real estate for funding my daydream.
That's great. That is living your daydream, and that is what we call lifestyle arbitrage. So congratulations.
Thanks. It's possible for anybody. That's the magic thing. If I can do it, starting as a high school band teacher, anyone can do it.
Well, you certainly can. And like me, and really most of us, you don't need to come from a real estate background family or an entrepreneurial family either.
And the magic of being financially free, you don't have to be rich to be financially free, but being free is the most valuable thing. As soon as your income, your passive income exceed your expenses, you're do anything you want with your time, including raising chickens and sheep and looking at beautiful trees and whatever gets someone excited and their daydream, focusing on that delta between more passive income than expenses. It is so freeing. And as someone who is there and has experienced both sides of that, having to work and not having to work, but enjoying the working, it's really liberating to be financially independent. And then I love working because it's fun, and sure, I enjoy the extra, income that it brings. And I particularly love the role modeling that it sets for my kids, and allowing them to see their dad work, I think, is an important part of their financial education. And I had a very wealthy friend who says you can only sit on the beach drinking fruity margaritas for so long before you need to have another daydream. And so for me, being out here on the farm and working hard and raising our animals and tending our pasture and tending our orchards, it's a lot of fun. But I also recognize, I can't really pass that knowledge to my children is their only vehicle for financial independence because they're going to grow up being farmers, which is awesome. But it's also, a choice to be poor, when you're being a farmer. And I don't necessarily want to pass that gift to them. I want them to be financially independent and to be a gentleman farmer. I think that's the best of both worlds.
Yeah, I think so too. Getting rich, get rich education, it's not just about financial wealth. In fact, it might not even be about financial wealth sometimes. It's about living a rich life, however you define it.
It's so true. Yeah. One of the most important things that I do when I'm working with a new investor is really understanding what motivates them. What's their compelling why? What is it the thing that is going to motivate them to create change in their life? Because without that change, they're going to have in the future what they currently have. And so if you always do what you've always done, you'll have what you always had. But to create change, to get to a place you've never been before, you need a new roadmap. You need someone to kind of just poke you along and say, keep going. And that external motivation of a third party coach, it only goes so far. We need that internal compass that says, I'm willing to get up and do some change making today because, and then it fills in that compelling why. It's the thing that really gets them motivated. For me, it was my family. For me, it was getting out to the country. For me, it was being able to just be in touch with nature while still having a great life. I mean, still having all of the abundance that the world can bring.
Yeah, I think once one starts with a compelling why and gets their head around that, I guess I'm going to say that they can become emboldened. Once they've got the compelling why down with some education, they become bold. A lot of times getting what you want in life, it doesn't necessarily go to the most intelligent. In fact, it doesn't really even go to the most hardworking either. You don't have to be the most intelligent. You don't have to be the most hardworking. Sometimes you just need to be the most bold.
Yeah, and find actually the most intelligent people in our society tend to gravitate towards scholarly research and medical professions and legal professions, and they wind up having very high paid jobs. And then they build a financial debt structure around a highly paid job, and then they're stuck in their job forever. So it's unfortunate that the smartest people that buy into the mainstream way of making money and the mainstream concept of success, they go get a lot of education, they go get highly paid jobs, they go spend a whole bunch of money that is congruous with their peers in that high paying profession, and then they can't get out of the rat race because they call me up and someone who says, hey, I've got $500,000 and I spend $5,000 a month. What can I do? Like, well, dude, you're out of the rat race in about 5 minutes. But someone who says, I've got $500,000 and I'm spending $20,000 a month to keep up with the Joneses next door. Well, you're probably going to be working for a long time, and your rate of savings is only 12 cents per month. Sorry, I mean, there's definitely ways that you can get out of the rat race, but that delta is so big. And the things that work to get you out of the rat race when the numbers are small are very different than the things you can do when the numbers get big. And so when someone says, hey, I need to get out of the rat race and I only need two, three, four, five, six, seven, $8,000 a month, there's things that you can do that are consumer type investing. I call it the low hanging fruit that can get you out of the rat race. But when you say, gosh, I need $20,000 a month or $30,000 a month to live, the answer is different. You're not going to go buy a bunch of single family homes if you've got to get $20,000 a month. Just the economy of scale doesn't work there, right? You're working in businesses. You're working on developing companies that project you out of the rat race when the numbers that are that big. Or you need a huge pile of cash. Like, well, what can you do to get a huge pile of cash? And the answer usually isn't saving. So that's kind of magical, secret sauce to getting out of the rat race is keep your expenses low, get your passive income high, and when you have that delta, you're financially free. And when you are financially free, it's like when you're playing the cash flow board game, suddenly you go to the outside circle and the deals change, right? And that is so true. Once you don't have to report to a job anymore, the deals change and the return on those deals change. But usually when you're still showing up and trading your time for money, you're in kind of the retail side of investing, and there's only so much yield that those inside of the circle, those kind of retail investments can produce. And it's enough. You can definitely get out of the rat race with retail style investing, but when you need those numbers to be big, you have to kind of reinvent your own path.
Yeah, to those that are highly intelligent and do have a high level of educational attainment and they end up being a highly paid professional, I think a lot of times they're doing that because they feel like they should do that because they're capable of doing that. And, in some sense, that's great. That serves society and everything. But a lot of times I don't think that person ever opened things up wide and really dug down and found their compelling why. And a lot of times that's why they feel trapped because they're doing something that their family feels they should be doing or society feels they should be doing, but it's not really what makes them feel fulfilled. And there are other ways to create value in society rather than being that particular highly paid professional. And, I think you, David, it's hard for me to think of a resource where a private investor, just an everyday listener, can come to you and say, David, here's what my net worth is. Here's what my cash flow needs are. Now, here, help me convert this equity in the form of my net worth into a passive stream of cash flow. You seem to be the one to have all the tools to help the individual investor do that, unlike really anyone I've ever known.
Keith, that's a really kind thing. And that solution maker mindset is deliberate. It's on purpose. And it's when you go to Google Maps and you say, I want to go here, that's only half the equation. You have to say, I want to go here and I'm starting here. And then you put those two data points into Google Maps and then boop, boop, pops up three different solutions to get from point A to point B. And I think that's a great analogy because so many people either focus on where they are or they focus on where they're going, or they focus on a path, but they don't usually connect the I'm here and I want to go there. David, how do I get from point A to point B? And the answer is it's always changing, right? Well, first of all, you've got three different options, right? And if there's traffic, you change directions. And if there's roadblock, well, you change directions. And that's a huge part of understanding market cycles and understanding what vehicles work at different points in history. And part of my bio is you see a lot of diversity there. And on some senses, it kind of looks bipolar. Like, well, David, why do you do so many things? Like get rich in a niche. And if you ask me, what do I do today? Well, the things I do today are laser focused. I do very specific things. I don't do 20 things in real estate today because the things that I have done to get where I am don't necessarily work in today's economy with today's economic forecast, with what's happening in currency, what's happening with interest rates, what's happening with prices, and what's happening with rents, and what's happening with demographic shifts. Those are all things that would influence the decisions that I make to go from point A to point B.
Yeah, and now I know you've characterized prior as really an investor living a life and having to consider two cycles. Number one is their personal investment cycle. And then the second one is they need to consider the market cycle. And you've characterized the personal investment cycle. And I love how you really tie in quality of life to these cycles because that's what it comes down to. Is one is sort of in this preparation stage where they're actually trading their quality of life and time for future investment resources. And then they invest to enhance their quality of life. And then they're taking the distribution later to enhance their quality of life. Can you tell us a little bit about the personal investment cycle and how that overlaps with the market cycle and basically how to find that happiness and go ahead and exercise that compelling why that you found for yourself?
Keith, that is a huge part of someone's personal financial plan is understanding what works for someone else isn't necessarily the thing that's going to work for them. And the thing that worked for you 5 years ago probably is not the same strategy that you should be using now. It's kind of like, using a farmer analogy, that when you take a plant from a seed all the way to an orchard, that plant needs different resources at each point of its life cycle. And that's the truth with people's financial plan as well. And so kind of what's sorely missing in financial education is people will meet a mentor or they'll read a book or they'll talk with their mutual fund salesperson and they'll say, here is the plan to take you from wherever you are to wherever you want to be. And I call that kind of an ignorant concept because if you want to go from Central Oregon to Anchorage, Alaska, well, I'm probably not going to walk. But if I need to go from here out to my chicken coop, I'm not going to take a jet plane. Those are very different vehicles to get from point A to point B. And so when I'm looking at what resources people are working with, I've got a great article on my blog at hasslefreecashflowinvesting.com on the 8 essential resources. And when we're looking at an investor's resources, that's the point A. That's what are you starting with? And the 8 essential resources are cash flow, equity, and credit. And I call those the above the line resources. Those are the things that most traditional financial advisors are going to be looking at. And in that concept of cash flow, equity, and credit, those are things that you can invest that will produce a return for you. And those, what I call above the line resources, are oftentimes the consumer resources. Those are the low hanging fruit that someone who's trading their time for money just in their spare time can trade those cash flow, equity, and credit for some type of a financial gain. And that financial gain is going to be either immediate or it's going to be delayed gratification for the future. And I wish I knew who to attribute this to, but 3 most addicting things in the world are heroin, carbohydrates, and a monthly paycheck. And I wish I knew who to attribute that quote to, because I didn't make it up. But that's a very powerful statement in looking at people feel addicted to their income coming in monthly because their expenses go out monthly. But when you break that paradigm and say, Keith, would you rather have $1 a month or would you rather have $20 a year? Most people in their ignorance are going to say, well, my expenses come monthly, so I'd rather have $1 per month. And if you have to buy groceries this month and you don't have any savings, then that's the right answer, because you have to have your money this month. You can't wait a year for it. Or if I said, hey, Keith, I'll pay you $1 a month, or I'll pay you $50 billion in 300 years from now, you're probably still going to pick $1 a month, because 300 years from now, you're going to be long and dead, and your children are going to be deceased, and your grandchildren are going to be deceased. And there's only so much generational planning that people are willing to do. So there is definitely a timing factor of when do you plant and when do you harvest, and making sure that that starting point and that ending point have relevance in your particular life. There is an economic concept that when you are investing for delayed gratification, you're investing for profits, not wages. That the person who's investing for profits, not wages, they're entitled to a bigger piece of the pie. And so if you can break free of that monthly need for income and you're investing for equity, then usually the marketplace is going to give a higher return to the person who's investing for equity than cash flow. But now flip that around and say, well, David, now I'm X years old. I want to be out of the rat race. I've invested for equity. I've got a lot of seed capital to go work with. Now I want to go eat. I want to go enjoy life. I want to harvest. It isn't time to build more equity. It's time, what I call the tipping point. You tip over from an equity investor to a cash flow investor. And the things that you invest in as a cash flow investor are very different. The vehicles are different. The taxation of those vehicles is different. But once you're at that tipping point, the choice to keep investing for equity means the choice to stay in the rat race. And so I talked with an investor and say, would you rather make 20% or 8%? And most people, and absent any other data, they're going to say, well, of course, David, I'm going to make 20%. Well, would you rather make 20% per annum, but you can't touch it for 10 years? Or do you want to make 8% per annum and you get to start consuming that profit immediately? And that changes the equation depending on where you are at in your investing cycle. And so many people that I meet, they're in the I'm growing my net worth stage. I've got a high paying job, but I'm still growing my net worth. They want to invest for cash flow because it feels good. It isn't really financially the right choice, but it feels good. And so they're doing those cash flow investments. I want a property that's positive cash flow. Well, why? You're not going to use that cash flow to live on. You're going to use that cash flow to put in your savings account, to pay taxes on, to go reinvest it. Why not invest in something that's going to produce an equity gain for you? And that equity gain might be tax deferred until the point of sale. And when you sell it, it might get capital gains, or which are taxed at lower rates than ordinary income usually. So when you're at that tipping point, oftentimes you're willing to sacrifice yield, selling that equity growing piece of real estate, for example, land. Maybe you bought a piece of land. I did. I knew this investor who bought a piece of land 30 years ago. She was working a job that she didn't like, and she held this land for 30 years, and it grew exponentially in value. She was a very rich woman because of the equity in her land. but she couldn't even pay the property taxes on this land from what she was making at her job.
Hmm.
And so she was living really hand to mouth. I'm like, well, you're a very rich woman. Why don't you just trade in this giant equity into a monthly stream of cash flow?
Yeah, at that point, she doesn't own the land owns her.
You got it. That's right. And I've made a bunch of equity in land. So I'm not saying land is bad. I'm just saying land is a vehicle like any other investment. And that vehicle you want to trade once your personal investing changes. And so when you're now a cash flow need, you change your investments from equity to cash flow.
There comes a time when one is in the season of their life of planting, and then there comes where there is that time where one harvests what they planted. We're going to come back and talk about that a little bit with Hassle-Free Cash Flow Investing's David Campbell. I'm your host, Keith Weinhold.
Garrett Sutton here, Robert Kiyosaki's asset protection attorney and the author of Loopholes of Real Estate. As an American or foreign-based investor in U.S. real estate, you know we are a litigious society. You know that you need to protect your real estate and paper asset holdings with the right mix of LLCs and corporations. My firm, Corporate Direct, not only forms these entities, but importantly, we properly maintain them too. If you fail to follow the corporate formalities, you can lose it all in an instant. Corporate Direct is your source for LLC protection and maintenance in all 50 states. Visit corporatedirect.com or call 800-600-1760. Mention Get Rich Education for a free bonus. Switch your resident agent service to us and receive another bonus. It's all good. We look forward to assisting you at corporatedirect.com.
Are you looking for a roadmap to financial freedom? If so, we have a solution for you. Norada Real Estate is offering a limited number of free strategy sessions to help you get out of the rat race. Learn how you can create wealth and build monthly passive income. To set up a time with one of our knowledgeable investment counselors, simply go to noradarealestate.com. That's NORADA realestate.com.
This is Frank Gallinelli. To grow your wealth, listen to Get Rich Education with Keith Weinhold.
Welcome back to Get Rich Education with our guest, Hassle-Free Cash Flow Investing's David Campbell. So, David, we do have this personal investment cycle and these seasons of life and these times and these events in one's life timeline, where as they go along, they may get married, they may have children, they may want to buy a boat, they may want to retire. There's all these sort of personal investment cycle times and decisions, but that doesn't always necessarily have a smooth confluence with the other one, the market cycle. So tell us a little bit about the interplay between one's personal investment cycle and the market cycle and how they can make out best.
Keith, there's a great saying, which is you buy in a buyer's market and you sell in a seller's market. And you plant corn in the spring and you harvest it in the fall. And if you get those backwards, you're going to not have very successful results, right? If you're the only farmer out there in, October and December and you're tilling your field and trying to plant for summer, you're not going to grow anything, right? It's just the wrong time of the cycle of life to plant a particular crop that is not intended to be planted in that season. And so when we're looking at real estate in particular, it's amazing that real estate investing clubs, when it is the time to buy and everyone is seeing blood in the streets and everything is on sale, real estate is the only thing that Americans don't like to buy on sale.
Right.
And so all of those club meetings, it's like a ghost land when it's the very time in the cycle that people should be flooding to real estate. And now you look at boom times in real estate and everybody should be selling their real estate. And suddenly the phone is ringing off the hook with people that want to buy property. And I say, well, where were you in the last market cycle? Like you're a little bit late to the party. You're planting your corn in the wrong time of year. So we have to deal with the cards that we've been dealt. And so it's a magical thing to be able to say, here's where I am in my personal investment cycle. Here's where the market is in its cycle movement. How do I navigate from point A to point B, knowing those two data points are not moving in congruence with each other? And the answer is, well, it depends, right? Well, because where are you? And the way that stock market investors are giant, hedge funds and mutual funds who are investing in the stock market, which I don't like investing in the stock market, but I sure pay attention to it because it affects other things like interest rates and psychology that do impact my investing as a mortgage investor and a real estate investor.
Yeah, I think I could say the same thing. Pay attention to the stock market because I want to know how other people are thinking, not because I want to look for the opportune time to get in so much because the real wealth just doesn't lie there. So,
Yep, because when the market is at an all-time high, I know the next move is down. And when the next move is down, there's going to be that loss of wealth feeling. And when people feel like they're losing wealth, then they're less likely to be paying a premium for real property. It also means that as someone who sells mortgage paper to private investors, people who want to get a high interest rate on their money, either through their cash or through their IRA, what usually happens is when the stock market has a peak, the phone isn't ringing. And then when the stock market drops 20 points, 50 points, then they call me up and say, "Ooh, I don't like this roller coaster that I'm on."
yeah, that's right. When you see the S&P 500 go down precipitously for months, it might be time for you to bring on a new hire. It's for your own planning.
Yeah. So the way that those big funds move is they move they never sit in cash. They never sit in cash. They are always in an equity or a bond. And they just go back and forth between equities and bonds, equities and bonds. And equity is something that you buy with the anticipation that it will have a higher value in the future. And I'll say that again because it's so important. An equity is an asset that you buy because you anticipate that that equity will be higher, that value of the asset will be higher in the future. That equity does not necessarily produce cash flow or dividends for you. You're just speculating that it's going to be worth more in the future. A bond is a promise to pay. You buy it because the issuer of that bond says, "I promise to pay you your money back plus a stated rate of return, a stated dividend amount, or a stated interest rate on that money." And so when the stock market is low, or as a real estate investor, buying the physical real estate and the stocks, those are both the equities, right? So as a real estate investor corollary, when I see the equities are low, I want to buy the equities. When equities are high, you want to sell, 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 sell. And when you are selling an equity, you buy a bond. And when equities are low, you sell bonds and you buy equities. And you just move that money back and forth, right? That is a great concept. However, it doesn't necessarily match what your personal investment cycle is. So there's a little bit of a yin yang in like, well, this is the best decision for me as a personal investor, but it's not the right decision in the market. This is the best decision for the market, but I'm not in position financially to do what the market says to do. And so when you do have an alignment of personal resources and personal goal and personal plan, like your financial life, personal financial plan is saying do X, and then the market agrees with that, just smile and take action, take action, take action, take action. Because that alignment of the market and that alignment of your personal resources doesn't always come up. I mean, you might be lucky if it happens once or twice in a lifetime.
Sure, someone might have just graduated college a few years ago and they had their first job straight out of college and they have a bunch of equity that they want to deploy into something prior to them being married or having children. So this is a stage where it might be tempting to jump in on a asset market that is high where the price has run up, but that's not necessarily the right thing to do.
That's right. So when interest rates are low, which they've been very low for a long time, what we are looking for in the hassle-free cash flow investing strategy is looking for positive arbitrage. We want to borrow low, invest high. And that formula works in any market cycle. But what I'm seeing is when interest rates are low, you can have a relatively low cap rate property and still have positive arbitrage. For example, even in a seller's market, there are going to be single family homes that you could buy at, say, a 6 cap rate, and you can go borrow money for 4.5% in a very low interest rate environment. So, Keith, if you could borrow money at 4 and invest at 6, how much money do you want to borrow?
I want to borrow all that I can.
Yeah, and you flip that formula around, and interest rates are 6 and cap rates are 4. How much money do you want to borrow at 6 to invest at 4?
I'm not a borrower at all.
0, right? And so that relationship of interest rates to cap rates is a huge part of the study of the market cycle and where you are at in that particular cycle. Because when we're investing in real estate, my personal view of buying real property is the debt is the asset. The good debt, the borrowing low to invest high, that is the primary asset in real estate. It's not the real estate itself. The real estate itself is just a vehicle to support good debt. And that real estate produces cash flow that pays the mortgage, and it allows you to have a dollar denominated asset that's moved by the value of currency. And so when we have inflation, that dollar denominated price of that asset goes up. It's an important distinction to say dollar denominated price, different than value. Value is what intrinsically that thing is you can trade it for. That's the value. When we have a dollar denominated asset, for example, let's say a hamburger. Well, a hamburger has pretty much always had the same utilitarian value. But I remember going to McDonald's when I was a kid and I could buy a hamburger for 20 cents. And good luck going to McDonald's today and getting a hamburger or any kind of hamburger for 20 cents. Like, it doesn't exist. The utility of that hamburger didn't change. The value of that hamburger probably went down because now it's got more artificial junk in it. But the price went up, not because of value, but because the currency that hamburger is denominated in has devalued, right? There's a great index published by the Economist magazine, and it's the Big Mac index. And they look at the dollar denominated price or whatever currency it happens to be in that country, and they compare different currencies around the world relative to how much a Big Mac costs. And then they can look in throughout history and say, what was the price of a Big Mac relative to different price movements? And it's a kind of a cool, fun way to look at currency. But when I'm looking at real estate is just a placeholder of value that I can use leverage to buy, and I can have the income from the real estate pay for the privilege of holding on to that leverage. Let's say I bought a property for $100,000, and the day I bought it, I could trade that piece of real estate for 5 widgets, whatever those widgets are. Now, fast forward into the future, and now the real estate's worth $200,000, and those you can still trade it for 5 widgets for that $200,000 home. So then you sell that $200,000 home. Uncle Sam wants their significant share of that $100,000 profit. You sell the home, you get your cash, you pay your tax, and you go out to buy widgets. And oh my goodness, Keith, I can't buy 5 widgets anymore because I had to pay my tax on that $100,000, right? And the value of the widget went from $20,000 to $40,000. Still a 5-to-1 ratio between widgets and houses. But because that tax bite is taken out of that real increase in price, you can't trade the house for the 5 widgets anymore. But here's the magic, and that's the leverage. So let's say you bought that house with 4 widgets worth of financing and 1 widget worth of equity. And then you sell that home for 5 widgets, and the price of the widget went from $20,000 to $40,000. And now you sell that home for 5 widgets, but a widget is $40,000. You owe the bank not 4 widgets worth of financing, you owe the bank $80,000. And you sell the home, you take 2 of those widgets, $80,000, you pay off the bank, and you've got 3 widgets left over. And you've traded your 1 widget down payment for 3 widgets proceeds of sale, less whatever your tax bite is. But the point is, without the financing involved, you didn't actually make a profit when it went from 100 to 200 because everything increased in price. In order for you to make money in real estate independently of financing, it has to literally go up in value, meaning the utility value of that property has to increase because you renovated it, because the neighborhood gentrified, because maybe there's greater number of people that want that particular property because of increased population density, and there's not a increase in supply that correlates with that increase in demand, or maybe it's an increase in the capacity to pay. Those are all things that might influence the value of the property, but we supercharge that concept by saying the financing is the thing that makes you money. That good debt, the ability to borrow at 4 to invest at 6, that is the asset.
Yeah, well, there's an awful lot of takeaways there. And I find it funny. I find myself doing this too, David, on shows. It seems like I'm always making these analogies that have something to do with a fast food restaurant. Maybe it's just because we can all relate to it. But yeah, I think with the McDonald's hamburger or Big Mac one, it is an apt analogy. Why does it cost more today? Well, it doesn't really cost more in a sense. That Big Mac just experienced inflation due to a debased dollar over the generations. It didn't appreciate in intrinsic value at all. Just the same way, a property value might be higher 10 years from now. Well, some of that's probably due to inflation, and some of it's due to appreciation, or maybe none of it's due to appreciation. It's just inflation, but we're still the beneficiaries. When that property inflated, our debt was debased at the same time, and it's so much easier to pay back our debt. You kind of made the point that, I like to put it as the property is often the least important thing in real estate investing, and the property really just secures that income stream. That's kind of like how I like to put it. And yeah, that is a really apt thing to bring up, that the low interest rates are really often the best asset of an investor these days, because even as a market heats up, when cap rates get run down, and just to back up for a moment, a cap rate is basically a building's income divided by the building value. So as people are more willing to pay more for a building at the same level of income, that drives down a cap rate minus interest rate. As long as that number is still positive, that's your profit, cap rate minus interest rate.
Yeah. And so when we're looking at the global market cycle, cap rates are fluid. But what's interesting, when you think about cap rate demand and you look at interest rates, and we want as an investor to have that spread, commercial, industrial, real estate, the cap rates tend to move somewhat correlated to interest rates. So as interest rates go up, cap rates in commercial real estate creep up a little bit. There are multiple demand factors that change cap rate, but generally there is a correlation between investment real estate, or I should really say commercial real estate held for income, and cap rates. When we're looking at housing or we're looking at land values, there is zero correlation between single-family home, owner-occupied single-family home pricing and land values to interest rates. There's no correlation. And that kind of, it takes a while. It's like a shock. It's a paradigm breaker, because you think, well, they should be, right? There should be a correlation between housing and interest rates. And it isn't true. Like if you look at historically, as interest rates go down, sometimes the house prices go up because people can afford more. Sometimes interest rates are going up because it's an inflationary environment. So interest rates go up and house prices go up. Or sometimes we're experiencing a recession. They're like, well, let's lower interest rates. And at the same time, home prices are going down. You're lowering interest rates to help stimulate the economy. And the prices still go down, even though the interest rates are down. So if you look at, I just pull out a graph and make a spreadsheet and see, I want to prove what David said, you're going to see that there is no correlation between interest rates and single-family home prices. But what's amazing, some people kind of think there is. And so they say, well, interest rates are low and cap rates are low, so I don't want to buy, or interest rates are low and cap rates are high, so I don't want to buy, or there's no rhyme or reason of what would trigger someone's investment decision relative to that spread. And that spread is the magic thing. And so example 2010, 2011 was such a beautiful paradise of investing, because cap rates were high at the same time that interest rates were low. And that was a one-off thing. I'm hopeful that market time comes again, because usually you don't have those two events at the same time. Where we're at in a seller's market is cap rates are low, but interest rates are even lower. And that's a cool time too. I mean, ideally, you'd have both, high caps, low interest rates. But at the moment, if you have low interest rate and a low cap, as long as you're positively arbitraged, where the cap is higher than the interest rate, ideally 1% to 2% higher, then it could make sense. It could indicate a buyer's market, even though you look around and the inventory is tight and there's multiple offers and everything. It could still make sense if you're getting that positive arbitrage.
Yeah, one reason I think it could make sense is because we have the benefit of fixing our interest rate over the long term while the cap rates move.
That's right. And when you're looking at commercial real estate, one, it's very difficult to get affordable fixed rate interest rates. In commercial real estate, to buy a long-term fixed interest rate, you're paying a gigantic premium for that privilege. In single-family homes, not so, right? I mean, you do get a little bit of a benefit of having an adjustable rate on a house, but the delta is not very big. So if you could use 30-year fixed financing subsidized by Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac through the generosity of ultimately the taxpayers guaranteeing that debt indirectly, or at least an implied guarantee, then that low interest rate is the thing that is going to allow you to control real estate through time, let your tenants pay off that mortgage, and to benefit from the arbitrage. But let's say you were one of those lucky people that bought in 2011, 2010, and you've got a whole bunch of equity on your balance sheet, and you're looking at your net worth relative to your expenses, and you say, gosh, I've got $500,000 of net proceeds of sale on this real estate after tax, and I've got a $5,000 life cost. It costs me $5,000 a month to live. That's 100-to-1 ratio. So if you're making 1% per month as a cash flow investor, that's 12% per annum, you could convert that $500,000 of equity into $5,000 a month of net spendable and now cash flow. And your property might not be able to produce that yield for you. Even if your property is producing a higher profit, much of that profit is going to loan amortization, and you can't spend real estate equity at the grocery store. You have to convert that equity into cash because your grocer only takes cash.
Yeah, as I like to say, a dollar is not a dollar is not a dollar. Something locked up in a building as equity is not liquid, whereas your cash flow is. So they're very different things. And yeah, as we talked about market cycles here today, David, things are cyclical, things move, that creates different opportunities, but interest rates continue to be suspended at such a low level, there's almost disbelief there. So it's still a great time to take advantage of low rates and hopefully lock that in for the long term, especially with a 1 to 4 unit property. So yeah, well, David, how can my listeners find out more about you and hassle-free cash flow investing?
Well, Keith, on my blog at hasslefreecashflowinvesting.com, I've got a ton of free education, lots of free videos, lots of great podcasts like yours. There are some ebooks that your listeners can download for free. All of the education on my site is free. We don't sell education one bit. We offer, like you, just a smorgasbord of great learning opportunities for investors, with the hope that if we find the right chemistry between an investor, then maybe someone might engage and want to invest in private mortgage paper through our company.
Yeah, well, David, you gave us some great ways to think about our wealth and how to think about our investor lives over the long term today. So thanks so much for coming back and providing so much value to the Get Rich Education listeners.
Thanks, Keith.
Well, it's always a pleasure to have David on the show. I've got to admit, he is just about the easiest person for me to host because he can talk anything, like anything real estate investing related. If you want to learn more about David, check out hasslefreecashflowinvesting.com. That's hasslefreecashflowinvesting.com. That's in the show notes, of course. David first appeared on GRE episode 51, where I got a lot of direct feedback from listeners that were just wowed because they had no idea that with mortgage note investing, you can basically be the bank rather than the borrower and earn a steady return secured with a specific piece of real estate, like one specific property. That's GRE episode 51, or again, hasslefreecashflowinvesting.com. Get Rich Education comes to you with new wealth-building wisdom, actionable information, education, and motivation every Friday. And you know, I just really want to sincerely thank you for listening to Get Rich Education. You know, there are a lot of things that you can do with your time, so I genuinely try to create the best value and the best return on your time that I possibly can, either with a guest or just here all by myself with some shows. So thanks again. Next week, I'm going to have 2 guests on the show at the same time, and they're going to tell us how they've made what they call wheelbarrow profits in real estate investing. That ought to be great. Until then, special thanks to David Campbell. Don't quit your daydream.
You've been listening to Get Rich Education telling you what the wealthy won't tell you about real estate and investing. If you enjoyed the show, please take a minute to visit iTunes and leave your comments.
Nothing on this show should be considered specific, personal, or professional advice. Please consult an appropriate tax, legal, real estate, financial, or business professional for individualized advice. Opinions of guests are their own. Information is not guaranteed. All investment strategies have the potential for profit or loss. The host is operating on behalf of Get Rich Education, LLC exclusively.